Hello, thanks for joining us in the Skurloff Farms workshop today. Today the project is going to be gluing up a panel for a fairly large cutting board. Now I haven't decided yet what the final form is going to be. I'm thinking I may end up doing an end grain and the classic checkerboard pattern. May end up going all out and doing almost a 3D-ish type board. So whatever we wind up doing, you'll be along for the ride. So it started out with this with 4 strips of walnut and 4 strips of cherry wood. Now on the 4 strips, there are 4 different widths. And so you have 1 each of walnut and 1 each of cherry. So on this particular board, I have a strip that's 3 inches wide. So I have 1 3-inch for walnut, 1 3-inch for the cherry. And then the next largest one is 1 3/4 inch. Next largest is 1 1/2 inch. And the final one is just a smidge over 3/4 inch. Now it doesn't matter exactly how wide you make these. You want to make this as wide as you want your end board to be. What is important when working with the pattern is that you have identical widths of the corresponding pieces. So these are my thinnest pieces. So I have 1 of walnut, got 1 of cherry, and they're both the identical thickness. And then each corresponding pair will be the same thickness. Next step is going to be to glue these up. I'll let them sit up in the clamps overnight. Then tomorrow we'll unclamp them and start having some fun. So let's get to clamping. We are getting ready to clamp everything up and just wanted to give you a shot of the tools we'll be using today. We've got the wood, some Titebond 3 glue. I've got some long clamps to hold everything together. And then I've got some shorter clamps here that we'll use for what's called cauls. And all the cauls are these are some pieces of scrap wood that I've put a layer of packing tape on. So when we clamp everything up and glue it all up, the cauls will be on the ends like so to keep the wood straight and in line with each other as opposed to trying to pop out. Okay, we're back next day. The wood has been glued up and we're going to take the clamps off. And I must apologize, my camera messed up when I was in the middle of gluing all this up and clamping it up. But don't fret, we will be doing another glue up and clamp up here a little later after we cut this sucker. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take off the cauls on each end, take off the clamps, and we'll take a look and see what we've got. And this is where those cauls having that packing tape on the board itself, they come loose of the glue really easy. Okay, we have got 1 large hunk of wood. What we're going to do next is put this through the drum sander. It is going to take, my guess is a good solid hour plus, feeding this through the drum sander to get everything smooth, get all the little bits of glue off. The planer I have, which ideally you'd use, would be much quicker. However, the planer I've got has a 12-inch width, 12 or 13-inch width to it, and this is 14 inches wide, so we're not going to use a planer today. So get ready for some sanding fun. After, about an hour or so on the drum sander, we've got both sides of this sucker sanded down, looking really good. I did notice I'm gonna have to do some trimming on both sides. So next step, we trim this to length, and then we'll start cutting off the pieces for the main board, and we'll get that glued up here shortly. Okay, the next step is gonna be to trim the edges off of the board. and I'm going to use this here cross-cut sled. If you own a table saw and you don't have a cross-cut sled, look into getting one. In fact, I'll put a link in the description to this particular design that I found online and built. It's very safe and it's very consistent when you're doing cuts that you'll see here in a moment. So next step, trim the edges on this, and then we'll cut them to length and put it all back together. Now the reason I cut so much off this end is I had a board that had just a little bit of a gap here. And when we glue this up, we do not want any kind of gap in there. We want solid wood to solid wood. Okay, what I've ended up deciding to do with this board, I'm gonna go with a classic cross pattern, and we're gonna do a 2-inch thick end grain chopping block. So in order to do that, what we're gonna need to do is take the board and cut every 2 inches and cut a strip. We'll then turn those on their sides, and that'll give us our 2-inch thickness, and that'll give us our end grain. With this cross-cut sled, what I can do is I can take a piece of wood and I could mount it exactly 2 inches from the kerf here, and that'll give me my 2-inch width. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that set up. Okay, we are ready to cut the strips for our end grain chopping block. Alrighty, we've got 9 strips cut out. I'm gonna go ahead and lay these out and see what we think for size, and if we need to, we've got enough extra for a couple more strips. I went ahead and decided to cut out the last 2 pieces, so we actually have 11 strips, and we'll see how many of them we need. So let's get an idea of size. So first thing we're gonna do is just kind of lay all these out. Now, we want to go end grain, so we're gonna turn all these up on their end. And there's a rough idea on the size, and that looks really good. Let's see what we got. We're looking at 20.5 inches by 14 inches. So I may end up trimming it down just a smidge, but this is big enough to actually, we could afford to do a juice channel in there around the edges. Sky's the limit. Now, for that patterning. So right now everything's lined up just the way it was cut. So we're gonna take every other piece and we're simply going to flip it around 180 degrees. And ta-da! You have your pattern. So you can kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like when it's all glued up. That looks really nice. I love these circular patterns here in the wood. Okay, what I'm going to do now is we're going to get ready. I'm going to sand a little bit on the edges because there's a little bit of a roughness there where the table saw cut. We'll make sure that's smooth, and then it's time to glue it back up again. now that we've got the initial sanding done, what I'm going to do is put this up in a vise here on a workbench. I'm going to take some 220 grit sandpaper and do the outer edges, and then just kind of dull the corners a little bit where they're not quite so sharp. And switching over to a little block sander, make it a little easier on the hands. Okay, we are ready to move on to the next step. We finished the initial sanding, including the edges, and now what I'm going to do is take just a little bit of water and I'm going to wet down the whole cutting board. And what that's going to do is raise the grain, and I'm going to let that dry, and then we'll give it one final sanding at 220. This just makes it really, really smooth, getting that extra grain raised up and then removed. And all I've got here is just some tap water and a paper towel. Nothing fancy. And yeah, you can already feel the grain raising up. All right, we've got this wetted down all the way around. I'm just gonna set this aside and let it dry for about a half an hour, and then we'll come back and sand that one last time with the random orbital sander at 220. Okay, the water has set on here for about a half an hour. It's got a nice kind of a rough finish to it. So we're gonna take some 220 grit sandpaper, sand it down a final time, and then we'll be putting some oil and wax on. Oh man, I wish there was something like Touch-O-Vision that you could see over YouTube. This thing is smooth like glass. This is turning out really, really nice. All right, so I'll finish up the sanding here. Now what we're going to do is use some tack cloth to pick up any of the sawdust that was left behind from that final sanding. And then we're going to put some oil and wax on here, and it is going to really change the look of this thing. All right, what I'm going to be using today is Howard's Butcher Block Conditioner. It's a food grade mineral oil and natural waxes. It smells really good. It smells kind of like honeycomb, actually. So here's what it's gonna look like now. What I'll do is let this wax and oil sit for a couple of hours, and then I'll come back with a towel, paper towel, or one of these blue shop towels, and we'll wipe it down, let it rest overnight, and then we'll hit it again tomorrow. there's our initial oil and wax treatment. We'll let this sit for a while, soak it up. It's looking good. Thank you so much for watching our video on making up a walnut and cherry end grain chopping block. Those are a whole lot of fun to make up and they will last you a lifetime. Do me a favor, if you make one, please shoot me an email or a comment or what have you. Let me see what you're doing out there. I'd love to see your work. As always, thank you to our Patreon patrons. We appreciate y'all so very much. You're allowing us to continue to live this dream and be able to make these videos for y'all. And if you've got any ideas for future videos, shoot me a comment, shoot me an email, let me know what you'd like to see. We'd be happy to make something up for you. We also have a new website. It is firewoodtofinewood.com. So that's firewoodtofinewood.com. The board you saw in this video is up there for sale along with some other boards that we've made. We've got some really groovy little wooden games, things of that nature. So check it out. Go shopping and see what you think. Y'all have a great rest of your day. Appreciate y'all watching. Thanks.